Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the USAEDC 2021 Annual Workshop. My name is Chuck Timko with the U.S. Dairy Export Council. The first order of business is to announce that on Monday, the USAEDC Board of Directors elected new USAEDC officers who will serve two-year terms, as well as a new member of the Executive Committee to fill a vacancy. Jim Sutter of the U.S. Soybean Export Council will be the new chair, moving up from vice chair. Julie Adams of the Almond Board will be the new vice chair, moving up from secretary treasurer. Greg Tyler of the U.S. Poultry and Export Council, Poultry and Egg Export Council, will become the new secretary treasurer. I will become the immediate past chair. Additionally, Dan Hallstrom of the U.S. Meat Export Federation will be becoming part of the executive committee, and you can see all the executive committee members there on your screen. Congratulations to all of the new officers, as well as Dan. I would also like to thank Greg Haynes of the Cattlemen's Beef Board for the 8 years he has served as an officer of USAEDC, most recently as past chairman. His service has been much appreciated, and his knowledge and guidance have been of great value to the organization as a whole and to me personally. Thanks, Greg. With these changes, I will transition today to the role of immediate past chairman. I want to thank everyone, whether fellow cooperator staff or FAS personnel, for all the help and guidance you have given me over the past 2 years. 2 very strange years, I might add. When I was elected at the November 2019 meeting, I never envisioned that I would not be able to take part in an in-person meeting for my entire tenure. But I think we as a group, cooperators and FAS alike, have successfully overcome these obstacles and are the stronger organization for it. A lot of credit should also be given to Lorena Alfaro for the time and hard work she put in to make these meetings and all the other USAEDC activities successful. Thank you, Lorena. Of course, you will continue to see me at future USAEDC meetings, and I look forward to seeing all of you in person at the next meeting in July of 2022. With that, I will turn this meeting over to Jim Sutter, and congratulations, Jim.
Thank you very much, Chuck, and it's my honor to be serving as the chair of the USAEDC. I look forward to hopefully not having the situation that you had, Chuck, where I was limited to only virtual meetings. I would just like to say that I think I have huge shoes to fill. Chuck Timko has done a wonderful job as our chair, navigating us through these unknown, uncharted waters as we conducted virtual meetings and all learned how to do things that were only things we'd talked about previously. I think Chuck, as I said, really did a fantastic job of that. We have, as always, we have a token of appreciation for Chuck for his service to the organization. I think we have a photo of that may be coming up. It's something that Chuck picked out and USAEDC contributed to the purchase of this. I think it is it's a beautiful picture, or a statue actually, of some Viking and Saxon war statue. And it really is, I think it's a very good symbol of the times we've gone through. And maybe it's a symbol that we're actually beating back the pandemic and will come out successfully on the other end. So take this, Chuck, as a token of our appreciation. And please remember your time as the chair of USEC through these difficult times with fond memories.
Well, thank you, Jim, and thank you to everyone else. And I certainly will look at this statue and think of these past 2 years and the fight and the struggles to get through everything. So again, thank you very much. You can't tell, it's about this high and about 30 pounds. So it's a big statue. So wow. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for all your time, and please know that I'll be relying upon you for advice as we move forward.
Give me a call anytime. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chuck. I know you've got to run to another gathering, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
So let me kick off this meeting as all good virtual meetings kick off, with a few housekeeping items. So please use the Q&A widget for your questions, because we hope we have lots of questions. We have some great speakers today, so please do use that Q&A widget. If you need tech support, look for USAEDC tech support in the chat, or you can, as you may have seen on the emails that we're cycling, or on the pictures that we're cycling through before the meeting began, you can email USAEDC at part2events.com if you need tech support. Hopefully everything's working fine for you. If the USAEDC app from the App Store contains all of the bios of our speakers, the agenda, all of that sort of information. Many of you have probably already gotten that downloaded, but in case you didn't, go to the App Store and get that downloaded. Before we kick off the meeting, I want to, again, as we did yesterday, I want to thank our sponsors. Please look at them in the mobile app to get more information and their contact information, but here, let me review who they are. Platinum sponsor Euromonitor, gold sponsor Bryant Christie, bronze sponsor Trade Data Monitor, and a sponsor at large, Rose Research. And as you may have noticed yesterday, our event sponsors have also donated some gifts that we will be raffling off. These are amazing gifts, and it'll be fun when we raffle them off. We have a big wheel that we spin. Remember, you have to be present when when the raffle takes place. So don't go away. Stay tuned so you can win one of these great prizes. All right, now let's move forward with our meeting. And this is, in this day and age of virtual meetings, it's really quite interesting because normally we would all be together in the Washington area having a meeting like this, or in Baltimore in the case of this meeting. But now people can be scattered around in various places. I happen to be in North Dakota today, so I'm coming to you from an office facility in North Dakota. And I know that our next speaker, I think he's also not in his office. So it's interesting how we can do these kind of things. But it is my pleasure to now introduce Mr. Daniel Whitley. Daniel became the administrator of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Foreign Ag Service in July of 2021. Prior to this role, Daniel served as the Associate Administrator for Policy and Analysis, where he led the Global Market Analysis and the Trade Policy and Geographic Affairs Unit. There's a lot more to Daniel's bio. It is in the app. I think I'm not going to read it all now for the sake of time. But Daniel, it's great that you've taken time to join us today. We look forward to hearing what you have to say, and the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jim, and hope I'm coming through okay. Appreciate the introduction as always. You're right. I'm not in Washington. I'm actually out in Kansas City at the National Farm Broadcasters, and I've seen so many of our good friends and colleagues down on the showroom floor just a few minutes ago, actually. And you guys are instilling good habits in me, so I appreciate that. And recording from a hotel room, usually my room is filled with pizza boxes and evidence of my support of the distilled spirits industry, but I had to keep the room clean because I knew you guys would be able to see my background. Jim, thank you for stepping up and your leadership. Look forward to working with you in your new capacity. I know you, Julie, and Greg will do a magnificent job. So I'm certainly looking forward to carrying on the very strong tradition of this leadership team in FAS. Chuck, thank you for your service. I join you in being able to attest to how difficult it is to taking over a leadership role during the COVID environment. I don't envy you at all, but you have done a phenomenal job. Take a bow, you deserve it, and appreciate your leadership through these very, very difficult last 2 years we've been through in trying to, run an organization, manage these programs in the COVID environment. Greg and Dan, congratulations to you guys. These guys I just saw about 30 minutes ago down here in Kansas City. Jim, I saw Courtney Nupp downstairs. So we've got a lot of our friends and colleagues here in town in Kansas City. But you're right, virtual presents us an opportunity to stay connected and have meetings and participate, albeit hopefully we can be back in person soon. So what I want to talk to you a little bit about today is not so much on the trade picture. Got a chance to listen to Deputy Undersecretary Hoffmeister's remarks yesterday, and I know he covered the comprehensive landscape of all things trade. We're very proud of where we are. We're very proud of our fiscal year record of $172 billion worldwide, and all things Jason said about that we're working on, it's true, and we're continuing to work on behalf. What I wanted to talk about a little bit today, next slide, please, is some of USDA's priorities. The department challenged us a little bit over 2 or 3 weeks ago to develop and come up with our initial thinking about what our priorities will look like over the coming years. And so we developed some priorities working with all of our program areas, working with all of our staff to come up with how we think FAS can support the administration's priorities and support all of the initiatives that we think will make a change and demonstrate our value to rural America and American agriculture. Next slide, please. All right, so you see here slide number 1, address climate change via climate smart agriculture and forestry. Unless you've been sleeping under a rock, and I know none of you have, you are well aware of all of the emphasis and focus that has been put on climate change in this administration. It's a priority up and down all of the different departments, all of the different agencies, and agriculture under Secretary Vilsack's leadership is poised to play an amazing leadership role. We had a lot of success from our Food System Summit earlier this summer. We had success at the G20 Ag Leaders Summit. And of course, we had success in the last couple of weeks at COP26. Agriculture is going to be a vital contributor to address all of the crises we face from climate change. One of the things that we've taken away is that so many of you have already adopted new sustainable practice, production methods that will showcase the leadership that American agriculture is poised to take. So we'll be supporting that effort up and down USDA and throughout the globe as we recruit and attract allies to our message, to our thinking, our science, and we refute some of those narratives out there that go against what we know to be the science that supports production agriculture. Obviously, we've got a couple of critical initiatives in this vein. The AIM for C, all of you know that this is a major investment piece we want to look at to induce countries and governments to make the investment so that we have the innovation and the technology to meet the challenge of not only being able to feed 10 billion people by the year 2050, but do it in a sustainable way, to give our farmers the tools they need to continue to produce products, but meet the growing demands of a very, very hungry world that we know we will inherit. Obviously, another initiative we launched is the Sustainable Productivity Growth Coalition. This is a coalition that is, you could argue this is a response to Europe's Farm to Fork initiative, an initiative which they want to reduce the use of fertilizer by 50%, reduce the use of pesticides by 20%, reduce the use of antimicrobials by 20%, and reduce land use by 10%. We understand that there are tools that can be in place that can meet the climate change goals and not strip those tools away. So we'll be working very hard in international organizations as well as in our bilateral conversations to push the agenda forward. Obviously, of course, part of what we do is expand market access. That is a critical function of our agency and our mission. Our partnership with you all solidifies that, underscores that, and we'll be working as hard as ever to continue those efforts. Obviously, climate change presents a new variable, and what we have to do is make sure that we're very careful that countries don't erect new barriers under the disguise of fighting climate change. So we're going to be representing and be looking out for those types of issues in international fora all across the globe. We'll be mobilizing resources, and we'll be using all of our overseas offices to gather that intelligence, that information we need to see what's happening with our trading partners. So hopefully you guys join us in this effort. You're a great partner with us, and we can move forward on this priority 1 of FAS in the future. Next slide, please. Develop and implement and foster a culture of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Again, this is another major priority for the department and the administration. We've made a number of new investments and initiatives into addressing this priority. We have some new partnerships in place to help recruit more diversity into our foreign service. We have initiatives in place to get more feedback and input from our staff, our employees, as well as many of our customers and stakeholders. So we look forward to having conversations with you. And I really, truly hope that we can work with you and mobilize you, because the fact is you all are out in America, you're meeting with students, you're meeting with young people who may look at FAS as an employee, who may look at agriculture as a career. And we hope you can share a positive message about FAS, not only as an employer, but also as a conduit to rural America and American agriculture achieving their goals and dreams. So hopefully that's something we can partner on, but we're engaged in a lot of conversations across USDA and the department to meet this priority, and we're off to a very, very fast start. Additionally, we want to make sure we work with our SRTGs so that we get the word out to many of our underserved communities. We know there's a lot of folks out there who don't know about FAS, don't know what we do, don't understand our value, and we want to bridge that gap of information to make sure we can brand FAS to all of our potential stakeholders around the globe. Next slide, please. All right, priority 3, create more and better market opportunities. This gets a lot into our core trade mission. I know Jason covered a lot of this, so I don't want to be too duplicative, but we're working very hard. I mean, I have not seen FAS this busy in a very long time, even pre-COVID, pre-administration change. I can't recall a time where we've been so active in negotiating and trying to resolve issues, from our very good friends and neighbors in Canada and Mexico, of course, to our long time friends over in Europe. Obviously, we've got China on the horizon, we've got Brazil, we've got market access, interests and opportunities in Southeast Asia. So we've been very, very busy. We appreciate all of your support. We appreciate all of your intelligence that you're feeding to us about what you're learning in these markets. So our job is to take that and move the needle forward and try to create more market access opportunities. So we're going to do that and continue to expand and develop more markets for all of your products. Strengthening international institutions. The international institutions are going to play a vital role with the climate change initiative. So this sort of ties in a little bit to priority number 1. But in reality, there will be debates over what methods, what procedures, what processes are truly sustainable, are truly impacting climate change. And there won't always be agreement. We will have to work very hard to educate our trading partners and many of these organizations about our approach. The coalitions and the initiatives I mentioned earlier are opportunities for us to do that. So we're going to be calling upon all of our stakeholders and partners to message to your colleagues, your peers across the globe about the way we go about producing agricultural commodities here in the United States. And of course, enforcing trade agreements. Again, I know Jason mentioned that a little bit, but the big piece I'll take away there is that we're very excited about the WTO ministerial coming up. I think many of us can all agree that the world is a better place when you have a trading body institution to sort of govern the rules of trade. It's not perfect. It is absolutely imperfect, but we can work to improve upon it. But we're excited to see if we can revive and put some life back into the WTO. That's one mechanism to enforce trade agreements. Nearer and closer to home, you talk about USMCA and some of the things we developed in that agreement. We certainly have this dispute settlement mechanism to look at some of the irritants that arise. And yes, Canada and Mexico are friends for a very long time, but occasionally issues arise, and we have mechanisms in place to address those issues when they come up. So we're excited about these opportunities to enforce trade agreements. Next slide. All right, strengthen and deepen USDA's contribution to global food security and nutrition. This is a major effort for the department. Obviously, the Food System Summit was able to put some coalitions in place that we were able to join, the Global School Meals Initiative, and we'll be able to maximize our existing programs to meet these needs. Of course, I'm talking about the McGovern-Dole program, Food for Progress, many of our exchanges and technical assistance programs where we can get in, understand the needs of many of our trading partners, their food security concerns, and apply our programs when they can be effective. We'll be working in partnership with USAID, but again, this is a major, major initiative of the administration, something that we can support with our existing programs. And again, we look forward to working with all of the cooperators who help provide some of the commodities that we use to feed hungry people around the world through these programs. So stay tuned for more cooperation on that one. Next slide, please. Making FAS a great place to work. I would say that the administration has come in and taken a holistic overview of the workplace. And I think they, by their calculation, they're thinking that a lot of government can improve upon the existing environment. So we're joining that coalition to improve FAS's workplace quality. We're modernizing the workplace. Obviously, COVID has caused us to do things differently, to perform differently. We'll have more flexibilities in FAS as an employer. There will be options for more telework. There will be some virtual positions. It has to be something that fits into our model so that there's no lapse in performance or no lapse in customer service, which I know all of you care about. So we'll be using all of those tools to make FAS a modernized workplace. We're going to make sure we're looking at data and looking at metrics to evaluate performance, as we have a number of indicators we have to measure out to in terms of trade, in terms of carrying out programs. So we're going to do those things and make sure we communicate effectively all of our initiatives to our employees. We want to enable our staff and be able to provide them input, but we certainly want to enable all of our leaders to make sure they're poised to make sound decisions that defends and protects the mission of the agency to make sure we can achieve our overall goals. So we're going to do a lot in that space. We got some things on the operations side we have to kind of pay attention to when it comes to IT, when it comes to our HR function, when it comes to some of our budgetary operations, but we've been making great strides in a very short time. So we're excited about where FAS is headed. Next slide, please. All right, a couple updates I just wanted to kind of share with folks before I turn the mic over to Brooke coming up here in a minute. Some things I think you all are interested in. First, I'll start with the return to the workplace. So on December 1st, all executives have been asked to report back in person to work at USDA. So they all were given a 45-day notice letter, and I'm pleased to say that all of our executives will be reporting back on December 1st. We're excited about that, and we're excited to be able to have some interaction, some in-person communication, and begin to sort of get some sense of normalcy back in FAS. So that's step one. Step two is January 3rd. I want folks to kind of circle that date. That is the day we can begin for the rest of the staff to return to work. We have some concepts in place, but no concrete policy that has been adopted in finality. And what our concepts include is we'll start with managers and supervisors to ensure they get a chance to return to the workplace before asking their staffs if there are issues with offices, issues with equipment, issues with furniture, any of those types of things. We can make sure we can get those things rectified before more staff come. So on or around January 3rd, we're looking to get our managers and supervisors back into the office place. Now, again, a lot of this is dependent on approval by the department, but we don't anticipate any hiccups. Once you get beyond that, the goal is to have pretty much all of the staff back in place by mid-March. And by all of the staff, I mean, I do include with their new workplace flexibilities. Our approach right now will tend to look at what are the key issues, what are the priorities, and where do we need staff in place soonest. So we may have some offices who are working on trade missions, for example, and we ask them to report back because we may need more coordination there. We may have some offices who are working on negotiations, and we may ask them to report back because we may have some issues to resolve there. So we'll have a phased approach starting on January 3rd that will begin with managers and supervisors and then prioritize the needs of staff back in the agency. And the hope, as it stands right now, is to complete that phased-in approach by mid-March. So stay tuned for that. A lot of checks and balances with the department, and I know the department has checks and balances with the White House, but if everything goes as planned, we're hopeful to get folks back in place no later than mid-March. ATP successes, my gosh, I cannot tell you how many success stories, how many kudos that we've heard about all of your great work on ATP. The use of the funds, the education, the market penetration that's been created. It has been a phenomenal thing. The ability to carry out these programs, these activities, has created a encyclopedia of success stories that we can recite and respond to whenever we're called on by Congress or even the department for that matter. So huge, huge shout out to the cooperative community for your expert use of these funds at your control. Keep up the good work. I know some of this work mirrors MAP and FMD. You're equally adroit at your activities development in that process as well, but certainly appreciate the specialized attention that you all gave to ATP and making us look really, really good with coming up with that program. New trade missions and shows. This is probably the one I'm the most excited about. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, many of us would like to be doing this in person. And I think FAS getting back to being with our partners and our stakeholders on overseas trade missions and shows is a vital part of who we are. It's a vital part of our value add to American agriculture and rural America. And we're excited. I know you all are aware of the trade mission we've announced to Dubai in February. We're hoping to announce other trade missions and shows later in the year in person. And we just got fingers crossed that we can pull these off and all of this comes to fruition. Our business model of trade and exports needs the additional touch of in-person communication. I think we work better in that fashion. I think our customers, our consumers appreciate, can understand our brand and our value in that manner. So we're hopeful we can get this done and get back to some sense of normalcy. So please, please stay tuned. We would appreciate all your support of these trade missions, your participation when you can, your staffs when they can. We just think this is a big part of what we do with you to increase U.S. ag exports around the globe. And the last piece, this may be the piece you all are most interested in. The very last thing I did before I left the office on Tuesday, headed out to Kansas City, was sign a new FAS grants directive. This grants directive really creates a pathway to address and resolve some of the concerns you all have had with program implementation. The first thing this grants directive does is it cements a new agency philosophy to grants. First of all, we are unified. And when I say we, I mean the Office of the Administrator, Office of Global Programs, as well as the business operations team. We all are unified to implement the most transparent and effective manner possible of our grants and our programs. We are committed to the agency's collective efforts to maximize effective program delivery. We don't think it's an and or, we think it's a both. We can do both. We don't think it's an either or, we can do both. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to be redoubling our efforts to drill down into what makes a good program partner, what we need to be doing on the government side to make it more user-friendly and address some of the things that have been brought to our attention in recent years. So what are the next steps? That's probably the question you have. First, we think one of the things you will notice is that a lot of the program functions will happen more timely. No foes, they will be operating more timely. Program agreements, they will come out more timely. So that will be one of the first things you all will notice as a result of this new grants directive. The next thing we're going to be doing is getting our SOPs in place and get those implemented. That will begin the conversation where we will be reaching out to many of our stakeholders, folks on this call, to gather input about what are some of the things that can be made better, what are some of the things that we need to pay close attention to. And of course, I'm talking about making better sort of the 424A process, all of those budget category submissions you all have to do. We think there's a way we can do things better, whether it's changing the existing process, coming up with an entirely different process. We are just committed to making sure we improve upon this effort. So hopefully we'll get these next steps out of the way in short order so we can start to get more input from the cooperative community and those who are most affected and impacted about our grants performance. And once we get down that road, we're certainly hoping to have all of that in place by the time you all have to make those submissions next year. Next slide, please. So with that, it is now my pleasure to introduce Associate Administrator Brooke Jameson. Brooke, as you all know, has come in and hit the ground flying. She has taken over oversight of our global programs area, oversight of our foreign affairs area. She will become the new GSM once we get all of the paperwork inked on that. And she is as good as advertised. Get a chance to work daily with Brooke. And she is certainly an asset to the agency, an asset to American agriculture, and an asset to rural America as a whole. So we're excited to have Brooke on board. She's a Denver Broncos fan. I don't know how I feel about that, you know, being a Cowboys fan myself. But other than that, she's got a lot of great qualities, very, very hard worker, and we're very, very pleased to have her as part of our leadership team. So with that, let me take a pause and turn the floor over to Brooke Jameson.
Thank you for that introduction, Administrator Whitley, and thank you, Lorena and Jim, for giving me a few moments to introduce myself and talk about this administration and the Secretary's priorities. As the new Associate Administrator, I will be overseeing the Foreign Affairs Program of FAS, as well as Global Programs, which, as you know, is the division that administers MAP, FMD, and the ATP programs. I will also oversee our communications shop and our legislative affairs team. As Administrator Whitley mentioned in his introduction, I spent the last 14 years working on Capitol Hill, so I know how important next year will be in developing a farm bill that works. The committee staffs and members of Congress will spend next year drafting pieces of the farm bill, holding hearings, and beginning to debate which programs should get more funding, what programs should be cut, and what programs should be modified. They want to know what works for their constituents. So Congress might come to FAS and ask for data or information, but the real influence over policy will come from all of you. So I would encourage you to work with partner organizations to tell the story of MAP, FMD, trade assistance, data production, and local assistance that you receive from FAS. We can't always tell the story of success as well as you can. And as Administrator Whitley outlined in his remarks, the administration and the Secretary are putting a very strong emphasis on climate practices and expanding diversity. I know that many of your organizations already have great stories to tell in these regards, and we would like to hear that information. I invite organizations to tell us how you're addressing climate change in your industry, or new practices by your members, or organizations that you've partnered with. Similarly, we're interested in organizations that have diverse memberships and leadership, or have changed their recruitment to try to improve diversity. Addressing climate change and expanding diversity will only happen if we partner together to figure out what works for your specific industry. So I look forward to having a deeper conversation to accomplish these goals together. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to attend USAEDC, and I will look forward to Danny answering all of your questions.
Well, Brooke, thank you very much for those comments, and Administrator Whitley, thank you. First off, Brooke, to the important stuff, I would say go Broncos. I'm happy to hear that we have another Bronco fan, and I saw John Tosperin also comment on that. So Daniel, watch out. I think I speak for all cooperators, Daniel, when I say that the information you provided on the grants directive is good news, and thank you so much for your leadership in getting involved in that early in your time in your role, and for getting it signed on Tuesday before you left the office. So thanks for that. I do have one question in the Q&A right now, and we're certainly welcome for more. We have about just a few minutes for questions, but I think when we have you, it's a great opportunity to take advantage of that. So the first question, could you elaborate a little on the FAS reorganization that some people have heard is being planned?
So there is no reorganization being planned. There's a couple of small right sizings we had to do. For example, when Brooke came on board, she actually took over Clay's portfolio. Clay moved over and took over trade policy and market analysis. So by USDA's definition of what we have to do, go through a 10-10 package, it's called a reorg package, but it's not a reorg. That was just Clay moving over and Brooke coming up. For her to the paperwork, for Brooke to actually become the GSM, that is also part of the 10-10 paperwork. That paperwork is known as reorganization. So the word reorganization, I think, is a misnomer. I think that process is kind of mislabeled, but it's really just getting Brooke on board, moving Clay over. Two other adjustments we made. Coming out of the reorg that we had 2 years ago, there were a couple of offices that had 2 managing directors and a couple of offices that had 1 managing director. And I think one of the lessons we've learned is that it probably makes sense for all of the offices to have 2 managing directors. So we want to give that firepower to the DAs and make sure that both Jean and Alicia and all of the program areas have 2 managing directors. So that was it. But I mean, the paperwork says it's a reorg, but it's not really.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that clarification. That should put everybody who had questions about that should understand that. Another question. You talked about climate change. That was one of
Mhm.
the first priority I think you talked about.
Mhm.
And clearly it's something that we've all been hearing a lot about, and I'm sure we will hear a lot about it in the coming future. From your perspective, as we look at this from our roles in dealing with a multitude of different commodities, what are a few of the first steps that we ought to be thinking about taking to be able to help promote the U.S. advantage in this area? So what would you like to see cooperators doing?
I'm glad you asked, Jim. That's a great question. The first thing that I think you all should do is educate us. Until you and I had a conversation a few months ago, I had no idea about all of the work the soybeans industry was doing with respect to sustainability, climate change, adopting innovation and technology. And I don't think I'm alone. I think there are a number of folks who are walking around the South Building and the Witten Building who need to hear from you the things you guys are already doing. Want to make sure you get credit for efforts you've already adopted, but really educate us so we can tell your story. The dairy story had been out there, that was a bit more prominent, but I was a little bit late to understanding all the things so many cooperators are already doing. So the first thing is to come in and educate us. Let us know all the great stuff you're doing.
Okay, well, that's something that people should be able to do. So everybody's got an assignment now, everybody who's listening. So how do you, as you get educated,
Okay.
how do you plan to incorporate cooperator input into global climate change work, and in particular, the UN Summit initiatives?
Yeah, I think one of the best things that I've seen, Jim, is when you all are working with your counterparts overseas. I have countless conversations with cooperators and stakeholders who say, hey, I've been talking to soybean growers in this part of the world. I've been talking to meat producers in this part of the world. And hey, we're all thinking alike here. They really want us to kind of press their government, their officials on this sort of thing to have these opportunities, these tools at their disposal. So again, you all being advocates with your peers around the globe and sort of doing that reverse market intelligence back to the government, I think is one of the most useful things you can do. Look, climate change is very new, and information gathering and assessing what's happening in the global landscape is going to be a challenge. So we're going to have to rely on all of our partners to gather that information and intelligence to figure out where we are and where we can be most effective in pushing countries toward what we think is sound climate change policy.
That is a great response. Thank you so much. And I think it's something that's very actionable that all of us
Yes.
can take away as another assignment, because as we collaborate and as we work together, we'll be stronger in this.
Brooke
I
can
think
tell
our
you I'm very
time-
good. I was
Go
just
ahead.
going to say, Brooke can tell you I'm very good at giving people assignments.
Well, that's good. I think we'll probably all work best with assignments. So at this point, unfortunately, we've got to continue moving on through our program, but Administrator Whitley and Brooke, thank you so much for taking time to be kick off our program for today. And we have, I think all of us have a great partnership with FAS, and certainly it is a pleasure to work with you and all of your team throughout the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's the best public-private partnership in all of government.
Agreed.
Very good. Thank you. Well, now we are going to move on, and it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Mark Slupek. Mark is the Deputy Administrator of Global Programs of the FAS. He leads the administration's dozens of programs that support global food security, economic growth, and U.S. private sector development of foreign markets for ag products. Mark's full bio is in the app if you want to read more. I really don't think Mark needs a lot of introduction, as all of us are fortunate to know Mark and have the opportunity to work with him. So I will turn the floor over to you, Mr. Slupek. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's great to be here with everybody today. I want to congratulate you on assuming your new role, leading USAEDC, and I want to thank Chuck for his service in that leadership role for the last 2 years. And it has been a strange 2 years. Chuck. You deserve a bigger statue than the one you got there. So my presentation today, exploring the trees, not the forest. This is the kind of thing that you have grown to expect from me, I suspect. We're going to hit some program details pretty hard. And I've got 20 minutes, and so I'm going to go fast like I always do. Danny mentioned a return to normalcy. And that begins on December 1, but that means that we haven't returned to normalcy yet. So I want to promise every single one of you, I absolutely promise that the necktie I'm wearing matches the shorts that I have on. It's nice to see everybody's little boxes on the screen today. I sure wish we could get together sooner than next July in person to rub elbows and eat cookies and stuff. Next slide, please, Shayna. All right, so the first thing I've got to talk about here is some customer service improvements, some program delivery details. One thing I want to hit on is timeliness. As you may recall, a year or so ago, we shifted the FMD program from an October 1 start date to a January 1 start date by making the last year a 15-month year. So the first January 1 start date for FMD will be coming this year. That allowed us to slow down the UES review just enough so that we could get the task, the EMP, and the QSP out ahead of the MAP and FMD allocation. So anybody who received an award in the first tranche of task or EMP or QSP has probably already been notified. We may not have gotten the EMP notifications out yet, but we've got some agreements out. I've actually signed some agreements that have come back. Task and QSP 2 months ahead of last year. EMP a whopping 5 months ahead of last year. Sort of some unexpected fruit that we're bearing from making that adjustment in the FMD program year. As you may have heard today, the MAP and FMD budgets are finalized, and we have been making calls today about those numbers. The GBI budgets are almost done. It says that including GBI in here, they're not quite done. All of the work is done. The decision memo is in process. All of this 6 weeks ahead of the January 1 start date. So it should be a smooth move into fiscal year 2022. The ATP amendments, I see here that I've got a typo. The ATP amendments have been extended. The agreements that were originally signed in 2019 have been extended for everyone who is interested through 2024, not 2022, as it says here. So that's another thing that we've done to make sure that that money will be available to you so you can keep pumping out the success stories that Danny talked about. I will talk more about all of these programs in just a moment. But I do want to hit on COVID flexibilities that we've been employing for the last couple of years. As of November, you probably know that the US has lifted travel bans, signaling the United States is back in business in the post-COVID environment. The flexibilities that we have provided in COVID were intended to mitigate the initial shock and disruption of COVID, but we've all had time to adjust now, and no one can act surprised by the impact of COVID. I want you to know that we're allowing COVID rollover to continue from program year 2021 to program year 2022, but we are not planning on extending that provision beyond 2022. So, as you know, the money doesn't disappear, it just becomes part of your normal carryover, but we won't be making a COVID carryover concession after next year. Please note that the team is working on the other COVID flexibilities with the intent to sunset them in the relatively near future. Next slide, please, Shayna. Thank you. The Agricultural Trade Promotion Program. You heard the administrator talk about the great job you've been doing. While the glass is half full, $150 million has been claimed. 11 groups have claimed more than 75% of their allocation. But the glass is half empty as well. $150 million is unclaimed. And 11 groups, interestingly, have spent less than 30% of their allocation. So just want you to know that's we understand COVID prevented a lot of the work that was going to be done. And we also know that the initial concept of ATP was to be quick and impactful, and market development doesn't exactly work quickly. But I do want you to know that as we head into 2023 at this meeting next year, we will probably have been looking at ATP balances, your spend out of ATP money and factor that into your 2023 MAP and FMD allocations. Because earlier this week, I met with a cooperator who had spent over 99% of their ATP funding, and that high expenditure rate by them means that they're out of ATP money now. So obviously, you know, we want you spending the money. We want you making an impact with it. We don't want you making bad decisions with it. But if you have a large ATP balance next summer, we'll definitely be looking at that when we're thinking about your 2023 budget levels. A couple other things on the ATP. So ATP, as you, of course, you know, is $300 million, a very significant infusion of market development funding. And it's important to understand its impact. Certainly, as we head into the next farm bill, it'll be very important to understand the impact of the $300 million injection. To better understand the impact of the funding, we have worked with cooperators to update the market development cost benefit study. It was last conducted in 2016. We are working to estimate the impact of ATP funding and establish a baseline to assess the impact after all the funds have been expended. This is an ATP funded study led by the Grains Council. Thank you very much. And with some help from the Distilled Spirits Council, the U.S. High Bush Blueberry Council, and USAPEC. So we want to thank them for participating in this important cost benefit study. We're also conducting a case study based evaluation, highlighting the accomplishments and the value added of ATP projects, including a diversity of types of programming and the size of the participant. Also ATP funded, also led by the Grains Council with the same cast of characters. And then finally, not ATP funded, but we are updating the last competitor study. That was conducted in 2015, 2016. We want to get a more current context for the additional funding provided by ATP and the competition the US faces, you guys face, relative to the investment of major competitors. This is a MAP funded GBI with USAPEC in the lead. The Dairy Export Council, Wine Institute, and the Grains Council are helping out there. Again, MAP funding on that one, but thank you very much for helping us complete these studies. We hope to have some information that might be useful as we head into the Farm Bill about the impact of the programs. Next slide, please, Shana. All right, I got to go quickly. Market Access Program. As you know, we get a $200 million authorization out of the Farm Bill. Sequestration this year, $11.4 million. The administrative carve out at this point is $5.6 million. We have just allocated $177 million in new money, which leaves $5.5 million in reserve. The big story in MAP, and you see it there, is that we have a $40.3 million carryover. That is the biggest carryover that I've ever seen in the program. And this is above and beyond the COVID carryover concessions that we made. This allows us to run base budgets at a whopping total of $215.9 million. That is a 12.3% increase over last year. That is a very significant amount of money coming through the MAP program this year. As I mentioned earlier, the GBIs are close behind and they'll be coming out of that reserve. Next slide, please. Foreign Market Development Cooperator Program. The Farm Bill authorization, 34.5, sequestration almost 2 million, administrative 1.3. We have just allocated about $26.8 million with an additional $5 million in carryover. Leaves us with a $4.4 million reserve and base budgets of $31.8 million. That is a drop of 0.5% from last year. Pretty insignificant, but I need to note it. I think it's less than $200,000. I know that for sure, but we do like to keep a healthy reserve in FMD for contingent liability purposes. Next slide, please, Shana. All right, on to the task program. As you know, the task program comes out at $9 million in the Farm Bill, $500,000 for sequestration, $1 million in administration. We have so far allocated $1.7 million, which means that we've got about $5.7 million left. We're feeling pretty good about that. The last 2 years, we were actually able to sell out the task program. So plenty plenty of money left, but we have been successful in moving the money out in the task. Last year, we had $7.2 million allocated to projects, and the year before, in 2020, we had $7.7 million allocated to projects. The reason those numbers are different, even though we sold the program out both years, is the Priority Trade Fund. We'd need another half hour of me talking to explain that to you. Next slide, please, Shayna. The Emerging Markets Program is authorized at $8 million. You may remember the last Farm Bill chopped it back from 10 million because we have trouble spending this money. Sequestration, you see at $456,000. Administrative expenses, almost $1 million. We were able to allocate $2.6 million in the first tranche. That's pretty good. We're feeling pretty good about that. That leaves $3.9 million unallocated in the EMP. Couple notes about the EMP. And this it plays into the Priority Trade Fund, which I know is complicated. The Priority Trade Fund makes available under the Farm Bill $3.5 million annually that we can sprinkle over any program that is oversubscribed. So in the last, a few years ago, we were getting leftover residual money from task and from EMP that we were providing into either the FMD program or to MAP. This year, we won't have any task money going into the Priority Trade Fund, but we do expect that there will be some EMP funding that will go into the Priority Trade Fund from back in 2020. Just as an update, in 2021, there was $5.9 million in priority trade funding that went into MAP, and there was $3.5 million in 2021 that went into the FMD program. This year, we're expecting that from, like I said, $2.2 million will be coming from the 2020 EMP program into the Priority Trade Fund. Next slide, please. Okay, our non-Farm Bill program, the Quality Samples Program, we always start, it's not an authorization, we start at $2.5 million. There's some sequestration that comes out of that. There's an administrative apportionment that we get, but it does not come out of program funding. We were able to allocate $600,000 in the first tranche. That leaves us with $1.7 million remaining in the 2022 Quality Samples Program. Last year, we allocated $2.1 million, almost sold out. In 2020, we were only able to allocate $1.1 million. Next slide, please. All right, so missions and shows. Danny hit on that just a bit earlier. The Trade Missions and Shows team is super excited to get back to in-person events. As you can imagine, and they're as excited as you are, I'm sure. The team is cautiously optimistic that 2022 will have a full slate of trade missions, trade shows, and virtual trade events. The 2022 list of endorsed trade shows is already on the FAS website. And we're hoping to have an announcement in December of the 2022 missions. So we have already announced the Dubai mission, and it has closed. And there was there was an outpouring of interest in that. We had 107 applications for that show. Not all of them are, will be making the trip, but most of them were pretty viable applications. So we're going to have a huge mission to kick off our return to the mission portfolio. If you have questions about the mission portfolio or trade shows, please contact Ryan Brewster directly, or you can reach out to me. Next slide, please. All right, around the horn, we're going to go hit a couple of my other programs super quick because I have a couple slides I want to close with about the Farm Bill. GSM and facility guarantee programs are open for business. They've been announced. There's information about them on the website. Contact Amy Slusher, or again, you can always reach out to me directly and I'll put you in the right place. Planning is underway for the 2022 McGovern-Dole and Food for Progress programs. The Food for Progress program, we are expecting to have a full slate of regular type of activity this year. Priority country lists, funding notices, public meetings will be announced soon. A lot of work is going on behind the scenes. The Agricultural Economic Development Division continues to work with the private sector to ensure that its capacity building efforts are relevant. There's a great success story with the American Seed Trade Association it's part of the U.S. Mekong Valley Initiative, but the Seed Trade Association has been a great partner with the Ag Economic Development Division. Next slide, please. Real quickly, you've heard about the Africa strategy. We are certainly keeping cooperators in the mix on the Africa strategy. I'm going to buzz through these real quick. Monitoring and evaluation is always a key to all of our programs. You will be hearing more about this as we start to implement the Evidence Act in FAS. I'm going to skip to the next slide, please. All right, so we're going to wrap it up talking about the Farm Bill. As you know, the current Farm Bill is expiring soon. 2 years from now, it will have expired. We will be sitting in fiscal year 2024, 2 years from now. The authorizations go through 2023. 2023 will be the 18th year of the market access program being funded at $200 million. That's 18 years in a row at $200 million. And it will be the 22nd year in a row that the FMD program will be funded at $34.5 million. And that is a lot of money. I don't want to play that down in any way, shape, or form. I've had the pleasure since the 2002 Farm Bill of being part of allocating over $5 billion under the Farm Bill programs to mostly to cooperators, almost all of it to cooperators. But it does seem like a long time without a raise, right? I think it's fair to say that it's been too long since these programs had a raise, right? So we came in at $200 million in 2006. So I'm only going to talk about MAP for a minute. $200 million in 2006. And we used to nickel and dime some program admin off of that. But in 2011, we started to hit the program admin a lot harder. Some years over $5 million. This year over $5 million if we don't give any back to the program at the end. Then in 2013, we started getting hit by sequestration, right? Sequestration has gotten as high as $14.6 million over time. And that's a big hit as well. And you know, between the two, you're talking about running a program some years as low as $182, $183 million of new money. And I've been complaining about that. You've been complaining about that for a really long time, but I never really sat down and did anything to look at what inflation has done to these programs in those 22 years, but going from 2002 to the end of 2023 when the Farm Bill expires. And so I went online and I found the, who did it? The Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index Calculator. And Dr. Williams might be laughing at me saying, well, that's the wrong inflation tool to use, but I don't care. Well, this is just a ballpark figure I'm working on. It's close enough for government work because it is government work. So I used this inflation calculator to determine the value of the market access program today in 2006 dollars, given that we've lost money to admin, that we've lost money to sequestration, and that we've lost money to, effectively lost money to inflation. Next slide, please. And what you see there, that yellow line is the market access program rising to the 2006 level of $200 million. The orange line from that point in 2006, you see that one go off to the right. That's the effect of sequestration. And the gray line takes off the effect of the administrative expenses that have been peeled off. But the yellow line is the real story here today. The yellow line, if you can follow it out to the end, and I actually can't see it because my picture's over top of it, but that yellow line, let me see if I can get to it so I can see it. The yellow line, by the end of 2023, using the BLS inflation calculator, says that 2023 market access program funding of $200 million will be worth only $125 million in 2006 dollars. That's $75 million that's peeled off of that original authorization. I think that's an important thing to note as you consider what you're going to do, how you're going to talk to people about the importance of these programs as we head into Farm Bill negotiations. And the one thing I'd like to add is on the FMD side. On the FMD side, we've had $34.5 million since 2002. In 2002 dollars, the 2023 value of the program will be about $19.1 million. So this is a significant way to think about how long it's been since you had a raise. Next slide, please. All right, we're on to comments, questions, answers. I'm maybe 1 minute over on my time, but I'm happy to sit here and hear anybody out who'd like to say something. Jim?
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. That was a great presentation, and you put a lot of information into a short period of time. So thank you very much. Also, I'm sure I speak on behalf of all the cooperators when I say thanks for making those phone calls today. I'm sure everybody is looking forward to the next year now, knowing what their allocations of funding are going to be. So thank you. And wow, that's something. You've allocated $5 billion out over the last roughly 20 years. That's pretty impressive. Okay, we do have a couple questions. ATP funding. Commodity groups who have used all their ATP funding apply for unused funds, unused ATP funds that may be available with other commodity groups.
No, they cannot. Sorry, Jim. And I'm sure you guessed that would have been the right answer. They can only be used in the year that we got it, or it can only be moved, excuse me, in the year that we got it. And so whatever agreement it was in on September 30th, 2019, that's where it had to stay. Any movement before that, we have certain mechanisms that we could utilize, but it basically would have required that somebody forfeited their money voluntarily. But no, they cannot. Now, if they could, we'd be having a whole different conversation right now.
I'm sure that would be an interesting conversation you'd be having right now. Another question, dealing with food assistance and the Cochrane programs. The question is, how do we learn about the public meetings and other opportunities for providing input into the Food for Progress, McGovern-Dole, Cochrane programs, et cetera?
Get me an email with your interest in it, and I will get it to the proper division, and you will be put on the list to be notified of everything they do.
Okay. Hopefully that's a great answer. Thank you. Another question. How will the COVID carryover work? Will each group receive exactly what was unspent by that group in 21, plus any other carryover available?
No, a group that wants to carry over funding for COVID purposes needs to identify specific activities that had funding remaining that they have identified as unfinished due to COVID that they will complete in the next year. So if you have $10,000 left in a project from 2021 that you'll be completing in 2022, we can make the move to slide that directly over into your next approval letter without waiting for it to go back into your agreement and not be usable until 2023.
Okay, great. And I'm sure if people have further questions, they can work with their marketing specialist on that.
Absolutely.
So 2 more quick questions.
Sure.
Thought the ATP was extended to 2025. I think you said in your presentation 24. Could you please clarify?
It's 2024. We have 5 years to move the money. So from 2019 through 2024 is the period of performance.
Okay, 2024.
2024.
Okay. And in previous years, you have said that how important and you made great comments about the Farm Bill and how the amount of available fundings actually in real dollars has gone down. In previous years, you've commented on how important it is that there be requests for funding coming in that are large enough to demonstrate to whoever's looking at this that there is demand for that funding. Was that the case this year with the applications for funding that you received?
I wish I could remember exactly what the ask was on MAP, but I know it was over 300 million, and I think it was over 340 million. I think, and if you guys could use 500 million, you don't have to ask for 500 million. You just have to show that you got a lot of interest, I think, in additional funding. You don't want to, because you have to support it in a UES request, right? You're not going to double your request when you're not going to get the funding. We understand that, but we certainly wouldn't want to have, barely clear the hurdle of the authorization.
Right. So everybody listen to that as you're thinking about your UES 23. And I said that was the last question, but one more, and this is a simple one. There's a request for your slides, and especially the last ones about the funding's impact over time. Will those be available?
Absolutely. I turned them over to Lorena and her helpers today. In fact, and I actually had a request from the Coalition to Promote Exports, or whatever they're called, already as well. So the slides are available.
Okay.
And if anybody has any questions about how I put them together, I'd be happy to talk about that.
Super. Mark, thank you so much for joining us here today. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your ongoing leadership and your accessibility. It's a pleasure to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks as always, Jim, and congratulations again.
Thank you. Okay, now we have one of these minutes that I know people have been waiting for. We have our first raffle of the day. Let me ask Eric Rosenberg from Bryant Christie to join me on the stage. And Eric, please say a few words and then give the wheel a spin.
Thank you, Jim. First, I wanted to say it's always hard to follow Mark in any of these conferences and presentations. Here, he just went through a discussion of doling out and awarding, millions and millions of dollars, even billions of dollars over recent years. And I have a watch, so the scale is a little bit different, but hopefully, nonetheless, no less exciting. And in all seriousness, Bryant Christie is happy to do it. We are super happy to sponsor USDAC again. Like our fellow sponsors for this conference, I think BCI is pretty well known among this group. So I don't really intend to go through a long background of who we are, but suffice it to say that we've enjoyed our long-standing partnership with USDAC and with the cooperator community. It's been a great partnership over many years, and that goes without saying. I will just add that, for those that aren't less familiar with us, we always appreciate the opportunity to assist groups with policy work, regulatory work, research, and market development in U.S. administration services. So if you have questions about that, feel free to check out our website and reach out. On to the good stuff. BCI will be raffling off an Apple Watch similar to one from yesterday. We actually asked all of our employees to go through and find their old unused devices, and we picked one that we think will work pretty well for somebody. No, it will be a new one. So Shayna, if you want to give that wheel a spin, and whoever's name comes up, if you use the chat function to let us know you're present, and we will make the award. Kurt Coppins, come on down. Kurt, if you're here, let us know. If we don't hear from Kurt, we will respin.
And Eric, I see that Kurt has raised his hand, so he may just not be familiar with how to use the chat, but he is here.
Okay, well, we've heard that Kurt is present, so congratulations, Kurt. We'll be in touch on making that award. Thank you very much. Back to you, Jim.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thanks to Bryant Christie, and thanks to your continued support. Okay, now we are going to move on with the rest of the next step in our program. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gary Williams, who is the co-director of Agribusiness, Food, and Consumer Economics Research at Texas A&M University. He's got a very impressive long resume, and again, please look at it on the USAEDC app. I'm not going to take the time to read the whole thing here, but clearly very high levels of education and lots of work experience that makes him an excellent person to help us as we do the evaluation work of our programs. He will be joined today by Dr. Oral Capps, who's the co-director of the Agribusiness, Food, and Consumer Economics Research Center at Texas A&M, and by Joe Summers at IHS Markit. So, Dr. Williams, I'm going to turn it over to you. We look forward to your presentation. Thank you. There you go, Dr. Williams.
Hey, I
The
am.
floor is yours.
Suddenly had Luke's there. Ooh, worried me for a minute. Thank you for having us come to be part of this presentation. I'm going to share my screen here. Mark Slupek mentioned it about 5 years ago. We did a study of the effectiveness of the Export Market Development Program. That was and we made a presentation on the results of that study at a USAEDC meeting. I met many of you there, and I hope many of you read that study, or at least are familiar with it. So you're familiar with the sort of things that we did. I'm joined today by Dr. Capps and Dr. Summers, who are co-authors on this study. Appreciate having them here. They'll be answering your questions after I'm done. In that study we did 5 years ago, we looked at the effects of the Export Market Development Program over history. In this study that we were asked to do this time, we also looked at that same historical effect of the Export Market Development Program. We then added 5 years to that study to take a look at it, new methodology, or at least an updated methodology, new data. I'm not going to spend any time talking about the methodology. You can read that in the study that we did before, or in the new study that will be coming out. The study is not out yet. We decided we would give you sort of an early look at the results. And well, because you're important, you're the ones that run this program, you're the ones that make it happen. And so you deserve to know what we found in terms of the effectiveness of the program now. And then look at some things like the effect of ATP that I know you're anxious to look at. So let me get to that. Well, the purpose of this study was to basically, again, look at the effectiveness of the program over history, but then also then provide some guidance on the effect on agricultural exports of various alternative future funding scenarios. And what I'm talking about here, first of all, is ATP, because as you heard, ATP hasn't all been spent. It was some spent in 2019, 2020, but then the rest will be spent out through 2024, as Mark told you. But then we said, well, then what? What happens after ATP money runs out? What will be funding look like for the USDA market development programs? So we wanted to look at, they asked us to look at some scenarios having to do with various levels of funding for USDA and what the implications might be for US agricultural exports. So looking at the historical results, this is over 1977 through 2019, we added 5 more years of results. This table basically gives you the average annual impact. We call it the lift. It's the average annual impact of the program. So in any given year, this is on average what you expect to have happen. $9.6 billion in additional agricultural revenue as a result of the program in any given year. But the most important number for you to look at is this one. 13.7% of the revenue that we experienced in agricultural exports from 1977 through 2019 are the direct result of this program. That was pretty similar to what we found last time. The 5 more years, very similar as well. So we feel good about that result. That it's higher than what I would have expected. I expected something lower, but it's still up there about 14%. If you take all those annual effects and you add them together, you get a total of about $674.7 billion in agricultural export revenues added by your programs. That's about 2/3 of $1 trillion. That's a big amount of money that you've added through these export market development programs to U.S. agricultural exports. And if you look at the volume effects, it's about 765.7 million metric tons added, about 6.1% higher than they would have been if it hadn't been for these programs. That's a very significant impact of these programs. If you look at what does that mean in terms of any sort of return on investment or benefit cost analysis, well, if we take that revenue that's generated, that looked at it back here, that $9.6 billion of revenue, and divide that by the cost to get that revenue, it turns out to be about $24.5 of return in additional export revenue per dollar invested in export promotion. That's a very healthy return. That additional export revenue it requires additional cost to generate that revenue. And if you subtract out that cost, and we have an economic measure of that cost, you get about $12.2 in profit, as pure profit per dollar spent in this program, over and above any cost associated with additional exports. So if you compare that, even how high is this? Is that high or is it not high? Well, the average return on investment we see across all the various studies of the various programs, and you have your own program study probably, and you've seen the BCR that they analyzed for that study. The average across those is about $11 per dollar spent. If you put them all together, there is a sort of an effect that it makes it even larger. So it's $24.5 per dollar spent. So let's go from talking about the historical results to look at sort of what's going to go on in the future. In order to do that, we first have to set a baseline, a forecast baseline. We have to figure out, we have to sort of forecast using the models we used to look at the history. We use those models to look at what are going to be the exports likely to be export revenue level in the future. And to do that, we have to look at all the different factors that might have an impact on those that export revenue level: foreign income, population, inflation, exchange rates, and many other things, and including export market development program monies that have been spent or will be spent on the program. So in this baseline, we basically assume flat funding. And by that, we mean that the MAP FMD funding remains at its level, the nominal $234.5 million through 2029. Now, Mark indicated very correctly that there's inflation, and I won't argue with you about your inflation rate, Mark. That's fine. We use a little different inflation rate. Just the same, he's absolutely right that the actual spendable amount of money, I mean, in real terms, the spending is a lot lower than that, and we do deflate that money throughout the export market program forecast we do for export revenue. So FMD money is 234.5 nominally, and the ATP funds, of course, spent in awarded in 2018 and 2019. Was spent in 2019, $25 million and about $75 million in 2020. Not all spent at once. And as you heard, it's going to be spent over time through 2024. And the assumptions we were given by USDA is basically be spent in about equal amounts from 2021 through 2024. That's the assumption. You can see on this graph that yellow areas, those represent sort of the future assumptions about how much of that total will be spent. So that's total 300 million in expenditures. And that ATP money represents about 20% of the total expenditures, FMD, MAP, and ATP. So it represents about 20% only from 2019 through 2024. So that's a good chunk, a good share of that amount of money that's being spent. So it's been pretty important and will continue to be important through 2024. But that doesn't include all the money that's spent to promote exports. If you add in all the contributor money, then for MAP, FMD, and ATP, then there's a lot more money being spent. In 2019, $936.6 million spent in 2019. 2020, $949.7 million spent in those years. And in 2021 through 2029, we assume that MAP and FMD funding remains flat, and the cooperator contributions will grow at about 2.5% over time. And just by way of footnote, notice that the ATP yellow gets smaller because it's being compared to not only expenditures, but also expenditures plus contributions. And it represents about, on average, about 6.87% of the total expenditures plus contributions over the 2019 through 2024 period. All right, well, let's look at what some of these various scenarios that we looked at. First was the ATP. What have been and are likely to be the effects of ATP from 2019 out through 2024 expenditures? Well, with our models and doing the analysis and looking at the effects of ATP, the results suggest that the ATP will generate a total over that time period of $11.1 billion in additional export revenue from 2019 to 2026. Yes, 2026 is correct. You'll notice that the impact of ATP increases from 2019 through 2022. And that's because, of course, they're spending more. the assumption is, but also because there is a lagged effect. When you spend the money in a given year, it doesn't just affect exports in that year, it has a lagged effect over time. And that's not just what we found, that's found across all the export market development program studies that have been done. They all find that there's an effect in the given year, but it takes some time for that money to generate its full effect on export revenue. And in this study, what we estimated was about a 2-year lagged effect. And that's the reason that even though the spending stops in 2024, you still get effects in 2025 and 2026 for a total of $11.1 billion. And if you take that $11.1 billion and you divide it by the ATP money plus contributions, there's about 300 million plus, I think there's an assumption of 90 million cooperator money put together with that, then you get a BCR about 28.4 to 1, which is a little higher than we found historically for the whole program. And one of the reasons is that's because this is a smaller amount of money, so that diminished returns hasn't kicked in like it does with a larger amount of money. That's just an economic term there to make me look smart. Anyway, so let's look at the sort of future scenario. What happens after ATP and all that money is spent? Then what? That we're going to look at in terms of funding, and how's that going to affect U.S. agricultural export revenue? So the first funding scenario we looked at, we were asked to look at, was a doubling of MAP FMD. What would if MAP and FMD is doubled? Mark said that we've sat there at that 234.5 for a very long time. What if somebody finally figures out that needs to be increased and we get a doubling of MAP and FMD monies? Well, okay. Under this scenario, then the flat funding scenario is what exists until MAP and FMD is doubled in 2024. Okay, so everything else stays the same. All that happens is that we double MAP and FMD, and then we see what happens to export revenue. The second scenario was, well, what if MAP was increased by 50%? What would that do? So if nothing changes, it says we have the flat funding scenario, except that we increase the MAP funding by 50%. And finally, what happens if, knock on wood, MAP and FMD program were eliminated completely? And what would happen? Well, again, it's the flat funding scenario, except up to 2024. But then after that, there's no MAP and FMD. And if there's no MAP and FMD, we figured that's going to impact cooperator contributions, of course. And so we cut cooperator contributions by about 50%, assuming that there would still be some cooperator investments in foreign market development going on anyway. So only cut that by 50% to see what would happen. Well, this is the baseline scenario. This is the forecast baseline. It starts out that this is actual 161.5 billion in 2020. That's export revenue. Notice on this scale over here, it starts at 100 billion, just so you can see this better instead of a smaller graph. It starts at 161.5 billion and jumps up a bit because of China. This is USDA's forecast scenario, and we've included that forecast scenario in with what we're doing. And then it comes back to sort of a trend level after that. And that increase is the result of increasing income, increasing population, and other things in the model that drive exports, along with foreign market development promotion. So the effect of FMD and MAP are all included in this level of exports, right? So the question then is, what happens if in 2024 we double the MAP and FMD? Well, the result is $44.4 billion of additional export revenue generated over that period. But that's about a 3.64% increase over what we would have expected to happen over the 2024 to 2029 period. That's an average annual increase of about $7.4 billion. Well, what if only MAP is increased and we say about 50%? Well, that would mean about a $16.8 billion total revenue increase. That's over that whole period of 2024 to 2029, generate $16.8 billion, about a 1.4% increase, which is an average of $2.8 billion increase over what we would expect with just a flat funding scenario. What if then after ATP, MAP and FMD the funding is eliminated, along with 50% of the cooperator contributions? well, then we take a big hit. Almost $100 billion in export revenue would be lost over that period, about 8% drop in export. So you notice that this is the export revenue forecast baseline. What you could think about is that here's the export baseline until we get to 2024, and then here's what would happen to export revenue, drop by a lot steeply. Remember, that's that lagged effect. It doesn't come into effect all at once. It has a lagged effect over time until it hits the maximum impact down here in 2026. And then you have this large difference between what would have been and what actually would be export revenue because we don't have the FMD program. That's a pretty big hit. So what do we conclude out of all of this so far? And I say so far because we haven't actually published the report yet. Well, consistently high benefit cost ratio, not only in this study, but across all the studies that have been done of this program. So it's not just us that are saying this, all the studies have been done back many, many years. And the benefit cost ratio that we found is still very much higher than the average across all the other export promotion programs. And the metrics that we use of program effectiveness are the effects on export price, about 7.2%, volume 6.1%, and export revenue then is 13.7% increase over time. Now, that revenue that's generated, that additional revenue is spent in the US, and that then multiplies through the economy. That multiplying through the economy generates jobs, generates income, generates GDP increases. All of that increase is important. And right now, Dr. Summers is working on that. He's just about done. If he hasn't finished that, I think he probably has. The effects of that on the general economy, that will be part of the final study that comes out as well. So you can look for that when that comes out. Well, so in terms of ATP, substantial effects on U.S. agricultural exports through 2026, $11.1 billion in total generated with that $300 million plus $90 million in contributions, substantial impact, generating a $28.4 in additional revenue for every dollar of ATP that's spent. So after ATP, if we double FMD and MAP, about $44 billion increase over what we would have seen. Huge impact, an important impact, and needed, as Mark was saying, because it's been flat for so long. Increase in MAP, 50%. They still get a significant impact of $17 billion over that 2024 to 2029 period. And if we eliminate MAP and FMD altogether, well, we're looking at $100 billion of lost export revenue because we don't have this program in place, and only about 50% of the contributor money still being spent on export market development. So that's where we're at now. I can stop sharing here, and then if you have any questions, I don't know if anybody has generated any questions yet, but I'd be glad to take some questions and then ask Dr. Capps to answer them.
Maybe if I could just make one comment, as Dr. Williams said, we're still working on the national impacts. And we are working on, when you talk about the farm economy, we're looking at the impacts on farm cash receipts, net farm income, farm assets, also jobs in the agri-food sector, in addition to the economy overall. We did this in the last study, and we're doing it again, which adds a lot more to the study than just looking at a BCR, for example. So there's a lot of benefits from this.
Well, very good. Go ahead, Dr. Williams.
Over to you, Jim.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that presentation. I certainly know, in looking at those numbers of the three options you projected out into the future, I know which of those that I prefer, if we have any say on that. And I think it certainly it's a bit of a call to action for everybody that is listening to this presentation in terms of the kind of action we need to try and influence in terms of where this goes forward. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the Q&A chat. I have one question here. You talked about the $675 billion that's been added in terms of export revenue.
That's $675 billion in exports.
Exports, sorry. Yeah. Could you, if this, and that was including the ATP, or that was prior to the ATP? ATP is only started in
2019.
19, yeah.
There's really only 1 year of ATP included in that 1977 to 2019. So it's only that 25 million. The rest of it is part of the forecast scenarios that we looked at in terms of the likely effect of ATP over time.
Okay, okay. Well, the question has to do with the way that the funding is spent. In your analysis, how do you do any sort of qualitative look at how the dollars are spent, what kind of program they go into, and how that affects the end score that you're coming up with?
Yeah, the process that we go through is called econometric analysis, and that generates for example, for high value products versus bulk products. And we look at the sort of what is the effectiveness of those two groups of products on overall exports are not the same. There's very different response of high value products to promotion than you get from bulk products. So we do look at those sorts of things and try to measure the differences and account for those differences in this analysis.
Okay, well, very interesting.
And the details is spelled out in the report, Jim.
Yeah, if you can stand reading through it, not fall asleep, they're all going to be.
And when will this report be published?
Well, I just sent a draft to Joe or Will, and he's working on his part. I'm thinking, what, in a couple of weeks, Joe?
It'll be closer to the end of it'll be probably beginning of December.
Yeah, that'll be a couple of weeks from now, right?
Okay, great. Well, I'm sure everyone looks forward to that. I have one more question for you.
Sure.
And this one is, many of us are not economists. So this is coming from someone who's not an economist, as many people who are listening are, but you make it simple for us.
Yeah.
So the question is, are you assuming that production or supply will also continue to rise to support the additional export revenue?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Production is obviously one of those things behind exports, and that has to be taken into account. Production increases along with, a lot of other variables that go into generating what is the level of exports that happen. And what we do statistically is try to isolate the effects of all of those factors on export revenue so that we can look at the specific effect of the foreign market development program. The problem we have often is that if exports go up, we say, oh, good, the market program is working. Well, it could be something else that drives it up or down. So production going up could be more revenue that may or may not be spent, but eventually it will be spent, gets rolled over, and that has an impact. And we do account for that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking time to joining us today and giving us an explanation of this important analysis program, kind of a measurement and evaluation work that you're doing. It's very much appreciated and clearly important. So thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, well, we will continue to move on through our program. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Vincent Fusaro, who's the Senior Director of FAS's Compliance and Security Division. Vincent, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. The full bio is again in the app. You can read about that, but I think we're all looking forward to hearing what Vinny has to tell us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim, and it's great to see you once again. I will make a correction, though. I'm not a doctor. I appreciate the upgrade, but unfortunately, I'm not on the same tier as some of the gentlemen that just spoke before me. So for those of you who didn't join the USAEDC meeting or see my presentation back in July, my name is Vinny Fusaro. I'm back with FAS Compliance. I was here once before in the 2010s from 2011 to 2015. At that time, I was leading the compliance team, and now I'm back to lead the division. Next slide, please. So during this presentation, we're going to go through a quick review of some of the changes. We'll discuss some of the things that have occurred during fiscal year 21 from a compliance perspective, some of the changes that we have in progress for fiscal year 22, and some of the changes that we've already made and how they may impact you, hopefully for the very positive. So I'll start with showing our current org chart for the Compliance and Security Division, because we do have a few new people that are on the team that are going to be involved with compliance. So first of all, myself, Like I mentioned, I've come back to FAS in July of 2021. So in May of 2021, excuse me. So been here for about 6 months now. Jamaica Henderson was recently selected as our director of the Compliance and Security Division, and she's mainly going to be heading up the compliance side of the house. Jamaica also worked in this division previously, having worked here for over 10 years, actually, in various different roles. We're very lucky to have Jamaica back. Unfortunately, Jamaica had another engagement that she was committed to prior to this USAEDC meeting and joining FAS, but there'll be plenty of opportunities to meet Jamaica in the future or get reacquainted with Jamaica in the future. And then on the left side of my screen, it shows the compliance review team. We're very lucky to still have Kendra Young-Strickler with us as our program manager, as she plays a crucial role in keeping things organized for us. A new employee is Mariah Martinez, who started with us this summer, and she is going to be our coordinator for market development programs. Mariah brings a wealth of experience with doing compliance reviews and auditing in other areas, and we think she's going to be a great part of our team. We're also still very fortunate to have Katina, Kelly, Jean Irvin, and Sue Owen still with our team. And Hetty is still on our team, but she's currently on a leave of absence. So as far as staffing goes and whether we are fully staffed, we actually have 2 vacancies, and like I mentioned, Hetty is currently on extended leave. We're hopeful that we're going to be able to fill those 2 vacancies in early calendar year 2022. And we're already in the process of starting to develop vacancy announcements to fill those 2 positions. And the rest of the team, as you can see, we have responsibilities for managing audits from external agencies such as OIG or GAO. And we also are responsible for the physical personnel, document security, you name it, for the Foreign Agricultural Service as a whole. And we also have responsibilities for continuity of operations. So all of that falls under the CSD umbrella. Next slide, please. So to review fiscal year 2021, so like any other team or organization, we had to make some adjustments, and we had some bumps and bruises, of course, as we continue to navigate our way and make some changes to our processes during the pandemic. So during fiscal year 2021, the team performed and completed 18 compliance reviews. And during those 18 reviews, they've reviewed 35 programs, MAP, FMD, ATP, right? They identified 22 recommendations for participants during those 18 compliance reviews. So that's 22 for all 18. And they also identified 4 recommendations for global programs which have been issued to them. The average time to produce a compliance report was a little bit over 6 months. It was like 6.2, so we rounded down. We did have some reports that were very long in the tooth. So I did see a couple of reports that came to me to be signed off on that were pretty close to a year in time from the exit conference to the time that I signed off on it. And we have some measures in place, as you'll see during the presentation, to try to mitigate that and try to get that average time down even lower than 6 months, hopefully, for fiscal year 2022. During those compliance reviews, we identified about $67,000 for potential return to FAS. Of course, there might be an opportunity to resolve those findings and submit documentation that would exonerate those findings. Next slide, please. So some of the most common findings that we had, as you see on the list there, unauthorized expenses, missing elements in contracting procedures and prevention plans, like fraud prevention plans. Some of the missing elements might have been related to sole sourcing or not bidding out every 3 years, things of that nature. We also identified some insufficient documentation, overclaimed travel expenses. So that might be related to per diem or other factors that were presented in the documentation. And on some cases, there were duplications of expenses, which could be accidentally processing the same claim more than once, but in one particular circumstance at least, we did note that there was an occasion where there was a receipt that had a receipt number, and there was some information like a dollar amount on that receipt. And during the review, it was identified that there were two separate claims that had that documentation with the same receipt number, and whoever submitted that documentation changed the dollar amount. So in other words, purposely made an adjustment so they can get that claim for that particular issue more than once, which they have a term for that. It's called fraud. So those are some of the things, those were the top 5. Of course, with all of those 22 recommendations that we had, there might have been some that didn't fit in that category. Next slide, please. So I'd like to offer my congratulations to the participants that are on that slide. These are the participants from fiscal year 21 that had compliance reviews performed that did not have any recommendations or findings noted. The Food Export Midwest, the Popcorn Board, Blue Diamond Growers, U.S. Hops Industry Plant Protection Committee, Northwest Horticultural Council. I'd like to again extend my congratulations on doing a great job. My understanding is that we do have one other participant that their paperwork is still being reviewed, but they currently do not have any findings noted. So we might actually have 6 before the end of fiscal year 21, and that's great. And if that is the case, we'll make sure that that person gets recognized next year during the presentation with the fiscal year 22 participants. And I'd also like to put out my challenge to those participants that are here watching this presentation. So we've had these 5 participants that didn't have any findings last year. So next year, I'd like to see that doubled. I would like to have 2 slides to show all of the participants. So keep doing your due diligence to make sure that your teams review those claims and they're filed accurately so we can get you on this list perhaps. Next slide. So what are some of the new things with compliance? So since I joined the team in May of 2021, we did make some changes, right? I already mentioned the new CSD leadership with me and Jamaica coming back to FAS. I immediately made a change after joining and having some discussions with Lorena and some folks with global programs and hearing some feedback from some participants, and changed the way that we report our findings. So prior to my arrival, we were reporting findings, whether they were for global programs or for participants on the same report. So there'd be a report and there'd be one finding for global programs, another for the participant. In some cases, the same finding might be written up for both, and it was a little confusing and led to some other issues. So that was my first change. We now report findings for global programs and participants separately. So any findings for a participant is going to be on your report, and you will not have any findings for global programs documented on the report that gets issued to you. Now, that being said, there may be times where there may be a finding or a recommendation that is applicable to both the participant and global programs. They still will be reported separately. After coming on in May, during the latter part of the summer, we did develop some internal training for the compliance review staff. That include fraud identification training and training on some of the changes that are noted here and that we're going to talk about for moving forward in fiscal year 22. We also developed and distributed our first annual report. So we developed an annual report that outlines the activities, some of which are covered here in this presentation, for compliance, the security office, all aspects of the division. That report has been provided to Lorena with USAEDC, and my understanding is that Lorena is coordinating with issuing that out to all of the participants. So we do have that available. We also held feedback sessions on remote reviews. So one of the things that we started to find as we discussed internally the remote review process and how it's gone for us, even though it certainly was a very bumpy road at the beginning, after we tried to implement that, in the early months of the pandemic of fiscal year 2020, the process is starting to refine itself and become so efficient that it's making a lot of sense to consider permanently doing remote reviews on some level, some sort of permanent hybrid. So early on, as we were developing the compliance review schedule for fiscal year 22, we still are not completely back in the office. The pandemic is still, of course, currently going on. It's going to be at least a few more months before we are back in the office. Travel is still questionable. So we have committed to doing the compliance review schedule for fiscal year 22 100% remotely. So all fiscal year 22 reviews are going to continue to be remote, and we're considering what and how reviews being done remotely can and will be incorporated into our compliance review schedule indefinitely. So we had some feedback sessions, and I'm going to get into numbers 5, 6, 7, and 8 during the next slides. We're also going to revise the exit notes to include all pending issues that are noted at the time of the compliance review moving forward. We modified some internal timelines to try to minimize the amount of time it takes to develop and issue a compliance report. And as requested, we're increasing the number of compliance reviews for fiscal year 22 and beyond. So for fiscal year 22, it may be a modest adjustment. A lot of that has to do with staffing. And then we're hoping to ramp up and get to where we need to be for fiscal year 23. Next slide, please. So regarding remote compliance reviews, we held 5 sessions with 6 participants. That's because the food export Midwest and Northeast, both, thank you to Tim Hamilton, had both of his teams join us and provide some feedback. And the others that we met with are here on the screen. So what we kind of identified during these sessions was that not only did we, the compliance team, think that we've been becoming more efficient and see the benefits of doing remote reviews in the future, but that the participants loved the remote review process once they got through the first one. And they see some specific benefits to continuing to do reviews remotely in the future. So some of those benefits, as they noted, is they thought that it was less stressful to prepare for a review because they didn't have to gather all of the hard copy documents, make sure that all of the documents that they may have had in storage somewhere are collected and presented properly. They didn't have to have us in their space for a week or 3 days or whatever it may be. You know, we weren't there. It was scheduling meetings to discuss things. There was less preparation time for those that maybe have electronic systems, and we actually have a panel discussion about that later this afternoon. And they identified their own potential for cost savings, such as not having maybe to have storage facilities if they maintain everything electronically. And maybe they can even downsize office space in some regards. And they could even have people from different offices all around the world, frankly, participate in the remote reviews on some level because it's 100% remote. Everyone's going to be participating that way. Next slide, please. Regarding the changes to the exit notes. So in the past, I've heard that some pending items that maybe were identified as recommendations or findings have in the recent past been reported verbally during the exit conference and not documented on the exit notes. So we're going to change that. We want to make it that all of the participants have some sort of working document that outlines all of the potential issues that were noted, which could become findings and recommendations once the compliance report is finalized. So whether it be that people maybe didn't hear something or felt that something wasn't communicated, we're going to eliminate that because the exit notes are going to be issued within 3 business days of the exit conference. And you all will now have some sort of working document that lists all of the potential issues and what it may take to resolve those issues before the report is finalized. So I think a lot of people have already communicated to me that they're very excited about this opportunity. We are also modifying in the past. I believe that we were giving participants 2 weeks to provide any documentation after an exit conference. In a way, we're still going to provide those 2 weeks, But again, we're taking a look at all the different angles and how we might be able to trim up the process of getting reports finalized and issued sooner. So we're actually going to give 1 week to provide any requested documentation. However, if that's enough, you can send an email to not enough, you can send an email to your compliance specialist and request an extension for another week. Next slide, please. So moving on to timelines for producing compliance report. So as I mentioned last year, our average timeline, we had some that were quicker, some that were painfully longer, but our average was about 6.2 months. So we're looking to reduce that. We're putting a goal in place that if the compliance report does not have any recommendations, there's no reason why you should be waiting 9 or 10 months to get a report to tell you that you didn't have any findings. So our goal is now 4 months or less. The compliance report with findings or recommendations, of course, that'll take a little bit longer because it's a more extensive review back in the office. So the goal for producing those reports are now going to be 5 months or less, right? So as always, there's a possibility of extenuating circumstance. So if there is a significant finding, if there is maybe potential for fraud, if there is maybe some complications that might take some discussions internally to figure out exactly if it is a finding or how it should be handled, of course, that might extend some of the timelines here. But in general, what we're looking to do is shorten the timeline by at least 1 month and 2 months for reports that do not have any recommendations. And these new expectations, and there's much more detail to what you're seeing on the slide regarding the exact stages of developing a compliance report, but these modifications are now cemented in our standard operating procedures, and they will be incorporated in the performance plans for the entire compliance team. Next slide, please. So the number of compliance reviews scheduled by year in fiscal year 2021, like I mentioned, we did 18 compliance reviews. I think that the team might have had a couple more of that originally scheduled, but had to cancel a few due to some downsizing and staffing matters. In fiscal year 22, we're in the neighborhood right now of 20 to 25 compliance reviews, and that's a projected number. Of course, it doesn't take much. If one person on the compliance team should leave us, then some of those reviews may be reassigned, but we may also have to postpone a couple of them until we get some people back in the seats. What we're identifying, and Kendra is already starting to draft the compliance review schedule for fiscal year 2023, and we're planning on having 30 to 35 compliance reviews. And again, that's pending the hiring of the folks that I'm hoping to have on board and getting them trained up during fiscal year 2022. And of course, that will increase the number of programs that we review, which hopefully will be somewhere in the 55 to 65 range. Next slide, please. So with that, that's pretty much all I have. The last thing that I would mention as far as some of the new things, just to recap quickly, we're going to report the findings separate. So global programs will get theirs, and the participants will get theirs separately on their reports. And if you may be saying to yourself, well, I kind of like knowing or hearing about the number of findings that might, or recommendations that might be given to global programs, we're going to be covering that in the future with the summary in our annual report. So you would have the opportunity to see it. The exit notes has been modified. We feel that we have some strong procedures in place for remote compliance reviews, and the feedback has been terrific. I do admit that the first time that somebody could go through a compliance review remote, it could be a little daunting, but we are been working with the participants and have been, the compliance team has been very flexible to the point that I've received a lot of complimentary feedback about the team helping some of the participants get through their first compliance review. So with that, we've got a lot of great things going on. And unless there's any questions, get ready to turn it over. Jim?
Well, great, Vinny. Thank you so much. And we do have we have a couple questions here, so let's move into those. But thanks for your presentation and your great explanations. So first question: does FAS partner with U.S. Customs Security Program, Customs Trade Partners Against Terrorism, or CPAT?
Yeah. So I think my email might be connected with that. If I could maybe, I'd like to pull in my security officer who's much more savvy in this area than I am. And then maybe I could get the question back out through Lorena and get an answer out to anybody who's interested.
Okay, so we should send this question directly to you, and then
Please.
you'll get back with Lorena.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. All right. When do you expect to publish the fiscal 22 review schedule to the website?
Sure. Okay. Well, I'll look into that and make sure that it gets published. It has been shared, I believe, with Lorena. And if not, I'll follow up and make sure that she sends it out to all of the participants. So I'll look into getting it both.
Okay, so that is already completed.
Yes, the fiscal year 22 schedule has been completed and distributed.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I think you, between those quick answers and between and your presentation, you did a great job updating everybody. And you know, I just thank you for your work in trying to make this as good a process as quickly with. I know for groups, it's important to get feedback sooner rather than later. So your efforts to speed that up are a good thing. So thank you very much.
Sure thing. And I would say real quick, anyone who says that you can't go home again hasn't worked for FAS and hasn't dealt with USAEDC, because it's been a great experience over the last 6 months, and I look forward to working with you and everybody in the future. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Vinny. Great to have you, and look forward to working with you as well. Certainly hope we get to see each other at the next meeting in person.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Vinny. Okay, and now we're going to move on to our next presentation, and this is an FAS Civil Rights Update. So here it is my pleasure to introduce Adriano Vasquez, who's the Director of the Office of Civil Rights for FAS. Adriano will share with us. He's going to share us a presentation, and he will give us an update on the civil rights efforts. Thank you, Adriano, and welcome to this. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Jim. I'm really honored to be here with you. If even though it's virtual, I would much rather be there in person, but we'll make do. I think I have about 7 minutes to do this, so I will be talking fast. I will provide for you in front in the initial introductory video and the previous slide is my contact information as well as my phone number. So if there are any questions that you have when I conclude this information brief, then please feel free to send it to me. I will respond as quickly as I can, because as you heard from Administrator Whitley and Associate Administrator Jameson, right now we are definitely focusing on priority 2. Next slide. Priority 2 of the administration, which is to develop, implement, and foster a culture of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. That particular priority comes or is solidified in Executive Order 14035. And it's basically saying within the federal government, we will make the priority of making sure that the organizations have diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which accessibility talks about the ability to get around in buildings and the ability to have different methods of ensuring that people are able to make it to work. For example, virtual versus in person, what type of different structure. It can also mean, from an accessibility perspective, when we look at the Title VI, which is the programmatic side, it could also mean how efficient are we following the Architectural Barriers Act, which requires certain adjustments in the workplace, like ramps, to make sure that people with disability have access to your establishment. So we do a lot of that inspection in the Civil Rights Compliance Review, which is distinct from the compliance review done by the Compliance Division of FAS. So with that, let me start by saying, I got to get this done in 7 minutes. And by God, I've never met a challenge that I won't take on. So here goes. We are a staff of 9 people, including myself. We have 2 additional positions that will come for us. We have a deputy director or director. My title is senior director. Her title is the director. And then we have folks that help us. Most of you would know Dolores Taylor and Nadine Gary and probably Francis Vaughn. who are actually the ones who are doing the compliance reviews on behalf of FAS. So what I will say is Dolores has well over 20 years working that area. And Nadine, both of those individuals are subject matter expert, and I mean expert. So you're in good hands when they're going over there to do the compliance reviews from a civil rights perspective, because our focus is not to get you. Our focus is to assist in making sure that whatever rules and procedures the federal government says that you have to follow with regard to compliance to receive federal financial. I heard Mark talk about 192 billion or 172 billion that dollars that are being made through trade. So our hope is to ensure that the compliance review lowers your risk of having a finding of discrimination or something that way. So we call it cost avoidance. So by avoiding the complaint activity, you're able to keep the taxpayer dollar safe, and you're able to do your mission. And that's what we do. That's the added benefit to ensuring that the compliance reviews are done. So with a staff of 9, we one of the benefits of the COVID experience has been that we found new ways of doing things. Actually, the virtual aspect of compliance review is very positive. We've gotten nothing but positive results about the virtual compliance review. It cuts down travel, it cuts down expenses. People are not jumping from here to there, the transportation issues. So we're definitely looking at increasing the number of virtual, going forward into a hybrid environment where regardless what happens within the federal government, whether we all go back and travel is again opened up, we will continue to keep the element of virtual compliance reviews. Now we will intermingle that with in-person reviews, because we have to, on occasion, have to go to the actual establishment. Otherwise, we won't be able to see where the signage for disabilities are, whether you meet the architectural barriers, that we won't be able to verify that. So we'll try to find a hybrid version that works for everyone, you know, the federal government and the cooperators. We see this as a partnership. This year, we completed a total of, we do universities and colleges and cooperators. For the cooperators, we did a total of 10 reviews. Some of the areas where I think we had some findings in where we could probably do a little bit better. And each one of those findings, we worked very closely with the establishment to make sure that we were able to address that and had a remedy in place so that if something came and if there was a complaint filed or if FAS was named, that we would be able to defend that. So some of the things are very easy. So out of the 10 complaints, 70% of the people reported that they didn't know about the civil rights training. So what I would ask is that in that area, make sure that when you do the civil rights training, you have them complete the training, have something that documents that they completed that training. Because what I envision is that they're doing the training and forgot they did it, and then they tell us that they didn't do it, and then we record it as an incomplete, and we go back and find out that there's evidence that the training was completed. Also, another area that I think we need to work on is the USDA program complaints process, identifying what options are available to people that you employ with regard if they want to file a programmatic complaint against USDA or someone else. They have to know the procedure for that, and that's detailed in the posters. 70% of the people said that they didn't know where it was or what it was. So that's something I think that we're going to work on this year to improve. I'm at 5 minutes now, so I just want to say that the next part is something that's very, very easy to resolve. When you do accessibility, when you have meetings, make sure that you identify the person that they need to contact if they have a disability for a reasonable accommodation, you know, whether they need a sign language interpreter or something like that. That's a very easy fix, and it's required on all publication. Also in your job announcements, if you make those job announcements, make sure that somewhere along that job announcement, you're putting down that you are an equal opportunity employer or whatever, lender, if that's the case, because that mitigates the risk to your agency. I'm looking that I am at 5 minutes and 49 seconds. So with that, I just want to say If you need us to come over there and help you with anything, if you think we're not providing a service, we're a customer-friendly organization. We're trying to work our way to yes. There is no question from a civil rights perspective that we will not answer. With the 2 executive orders in place, racial equity and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, most of our work is handling those type of issues right now. There are a total of 9 executive orders. They all bleed back into those 2 executive orders. So I highly recommend that you at least take a look at them to see what we are required to do for outward facing organization with the racial equity, because it's going to require more data collection, and we're going to be asking that, but we're not just going to drop it on you. We're going to actually try to figure out a plan not to create additional hurdles for you or for us in capturing this data, because every decision has to be data driven. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Jim.
Well, Adriano, thank you so much for delivering a great presentation on time. That was great, and I really like the attitude that you talked about of one of avoidance and one of trying to get to yes and work being very, very user friendly. And I think you've done such a good job in your presentation. We didn't actually have any questions, so you must have resolved that. So congratulations to you. I think you're our only speaker today who has made it through and has answered everything without having any questions. So I think a big hats off to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.
And it's great to have your contact information. So if people do have questions, I'm sure they can reach out to you right here at this contact.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now next on our agenda, another one of these moments that people are going to have been waiting for. We're going to have a couple more sponsor raffles. So I would like to welcome Brad from Rose Research, who is going to raffle off 2 more bottles of wine. So Brad, the floor is yours.
Hi, Jim. Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure to listen to all of the presentations over the last couple of days, and really look forward to seeing everybody in person next year, hopefully in Arlington in July. Lorena asked me just before we spin this wheel a couple more times. I know everybody is holding their breath to see who will win the next couple of items that will be raffling. Lorena asked that we just take a minute to honor Greg Haynes for his services over the past 8 years. I believe that this is Greg's last event that he will be participating as a member of USAIDC's executive committee. So we wanted to thank Greg for his tireless efforts and all of his contributions over the past 8 years. Greg, we will be sending you, whether you like it or not, we'll be sending you a couple of bottles of wine. So please send us your mailing address, and we would love to do that. So with that being said, we're going to get ready to do our next raffle. As I mentioned yesterday, unfortunately, the sample bottle did not make it through the end of last night, but no worries. We are getting more wine produced. We've got people stepping on grapes. So we'll have 2 more bottles of wine to go out to the next lucky recipient. Participating in USAIDC over the past number of years, it's always been an honor for us to be a sponsor, and we look forward to continuing that relationship with everybody, including Lorena. And I honestly, and those are my dogs speaking, those are the Bob Barkers in my house, if we're going to stick with the host thing that I've been working on here, the game show host thing. I didn't realize, I always knew that USAIDC was a popular event, but I didn't realize how popular and how well viewed it was until we got some cease and desist letters from a number of the industry's most popular game show hosts, like Drew Carey, Steve Harvey, etc. In terms of the wheel we have, and in terms of this idea of the game show. But we said to everybody, why don't let's make a deal. We're going to press our luck, and we're going to move ahead, and we're going to spin that wheel again anyway. So Shayna, if we don't mind, let's spin that wheel and see who the next winner of 2 bottles of Rose Research wine is going to be. No whammies. Abby Kirkoni is our next winner. Abby, are you here? If you are, please let us know. Otherwise, I'm going to have to warm up that arm and spin that wheel again. I didn't realize how tough this is. Abby is here. Terrific. So congratulations, Abby. Please send us your information. We'll get that off to you. And I am now going to move this over to our next presenter for the next raffle. I believe that is Devora Kaufman who will be taking part in that. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to seeing you again in person.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Devora, over to you. Devora from Euromonitor.
Hi, everybody. Once again, I'm Devora Kaufman from Euromonitor International. Patty LaGuire and I, as your USDA team, are delighted to continue our platinum sponsorship this year. And we really look forward to meeting you in person, hopefully in July. At Euromonitor, we thrive on data and the insights that we get from that data to help our clients be successful. Going into 2022, as we prepare to open our 16th global office, we are looking forward to partnering together with you to bring our deep understanding of world markets, channels, and consumers to support and drive your export success. And now for the grand prize, we are raffling off today a Sonos Bluetooth speaker. So let's spin the wheel. We have a winner that I think that's pronounced Honore. Honore, if you are here, please put your name in the chat box or let us know that you're here. And otherwise we will have to spin again. Honore, are you here? Any of your colleagues might be here that can let us know if you are attending today. Okay. I think we're going to have to spin again. It looks like we're going to have to spin again. Okay, so let's try that again. Okay, this one is a lot easier to pronounce. Kim, are you here? Yes, Kim is here. Okay, congratulations, Kim. So we will be reaching out to get your details so we can go ahead and send that speaker to you and hope you enjoy it. And thanks everybody for all the great presentations today and really so excited to be here. Thanks, and back to you again, Jim.
Devora, thank you very much. And I think you win the prize for the jazziest music that went along with your wheel spinning. So congratulations on that. So we're at a time in the presentation where we're going to do a quick little wrap up, and then we're going to break into the breakout session. So we'll talk about those in just a moment. But I'd just like to comment as we're closing this plenary part of our meeting. You know, today was really devoted mainly to FAS, and then with also the information from the Texas A&M folks. But what a great FAS team we have to work with. And I really thank all of them for the partnership that we have. I'm sure for many of us, it's a daily occurrence that somewhere part of our organization is working with FAS, and it really truly is a partnership. And I think as Administrator Whitley said, it's the best public-private partnership in U.S. government. So let's make sure we keep it that way, and thanks for all the partnership. Thanks also to our sponsors, Euromonitor, Rose Research, Bryant Christie, and TDM. Without you, we couldn't have meetings like this, and I think the addition of the raffles made it a little fun, and seems like it kept people in attendance at the meeting, so that's great. I want to remind people that the presentations are available in the app, so go there. It's a very useful thing. Make sure you're paying attention to that. And please also be on the lookout for a survey after this meeting. You know, we want to hear from you. We want to hear what worked, what didn't work, and we want to get your feedback for the next meeting. Hopefully, we won't be preparing for the next virtual meeting, but we do want to be preparing for the next meeting. And by the way, we have it on our calendars, July 13th and 14th at the Hilton in Hilton McLean in Tyson's Corner. That's where we have a contract with that hotel for the next meeting. So July 13 and 14, 22. So put that in your calendar. Before we go to the breakouts, one more thing. I just wanted to share a little bit of information on the Ag Trade Education Council, or ATEC. And this is a group that provides educational information on trade structures, policies, and practices to inform and empower decision makers that facilitate growth in U.S. food and agriculture. It's a 501c3 nonprofit chaired by ag leaders with decades of experience in informing farmers, policymakers, and businesses about how the international trade system works. USADC is going to be hosting an informational seminar in January for members interested in learning more about ATEC's work and ways to engage with that organization. Lorena will be in touch in early January with details about that. But that sounds like a very interesting and worthwhile organization for some of us to partner with. So thank you for that. Now, let me talk briefly about our breakout sessions. The way this will work is that you'll leave this session and you'll go to one of the 3 breakout sessions. There are 3 of them. The chat, or in the chat, you will see the Zoom link for each of the breakouts. And in your app, you have to keep referring to this app. In your app, if you click on the meeting there, you can get the names of the participants in each of the 3 breakouts. I would love to read them to you and give you a little bit of information about each person because we have great participants, but we don't want to take the time to do that because we're already 4 minutes into their time. So I'm just going to give you the names of the breakouts. Number 1, developing electronic systems and file sharing for compliance reviews. This is moderated by Vinny, and he already talked a little bit about that. The second one is single-use plastics and the ban that is in France and beyond. What does it mean for cooperators? This is moderated by Jose Pepe Calderon from Farm Pack. And the third breakout session, a topic that Administrator Whitley talked about, is climate change and the public-private sector priorities. And this one is moderated by Roz Leek from the U.S. Soybean Export Council. So please look in the app, see who all the participants are, and then go to one of those breakout sessions. The link for those meetings is in the chat. So thank you all. Look forward to seeing you in July and see you in the breakout rooms. Thank you.